Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are with recorded lecture number 4. We're still in week 2. We're still talking about Thomas Hobbes. In our last recorded lecture, which might have been a few days for you, for me, it's actually the same day, we talked about social contract theory, what that's all about. We talked about Thomas Hobbes, a little bit about his life and how he was essentially horrified and traumatized by the English Civil War and how he essentially wants to give a lot of power to a centralized government. And we talked about Leviathan chapters 13 through 15, where he talks about the state of nature, as well as talks to us about what he calls the first and second law of nature, which again, the first and second law of nature are just laws that everyone will want to sort of agree to or move towards to in the absence of a government or a common power. Today, we're going to go ahead and talk about chapters 17 and 18. They're not too much. We only have about 3 slides to talk about, but they're pretty dense. They're pretty dense. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. One second. Let me go ahead and minimize my head here. Okay. Okay. Here we are. Chapter 17. Sorry, I was a little lost for a second. So, chapter 17. At this point, we see that we need to escape the state of nature, because if we don't escape the state of nature, our life is going to be horrible, nasty, brutish, and short, according to Thomas Hobbes. And he believes that anyone who is reasonable and in the state of nature would realize that the purpose of a government, or the purpose of a commonwealth, as he calls it, is security. It will create safety. As such, any reasonable person, according to him, will follow the laws of nature and then conclude that they can't rely solely on covenants, solely on promises with other people. They also need a government to sort of enforce those covenants. This government, he says, cannot be created solely by the laws of nature. Again, because the laws of nature just push people to create covenants. But if you promise me you won't attack me, and I promise you won't attack me, well, if we're in the state of nature, eventually it'll be more beneficial for me to attack you, or more beneficial for you to attack me, than to not. We need something to sort of enforce it, because he says covenants are useless without a common power. Covenants are useless without someone to enforce them. This government cannot be created by a few families either, because they, he says, would not be able to fend off an invasion. I think he's being a little odd in this point, a little vague in this point, because I think it'll depend a lot on what those few families, how many families is a few families. But nonetheless, he says that a covenant or a government, a common power, cannot be created by a few families. At the end of the day, you need a strong coercive power, a common power that coerces in order to create this government, in order to create this commonwealth. You might be asking, well, aren't there some animals that seem to live in a government or a commonwealth without a strong centralized power, without a strong centralized common power? And he says this to that. Well, those animals are not continually in competition for honor and dignity like people are, and their common good does not differ from their private good the way it would for a human. For a human, a human's private good might not be the same with the collective good of society. And you might look at the examples of, for instance, bees, which is an example that he himself gives. So the only way to create a government is to create common power. And the only way to create common power is to do the following, according to him. Everyone in the land, not just a few families, but everyone in the land needs to give it all their power. They need to give all their power to either one person or a group of people. He says this: the only way to erect such a common power, according to Thomas Hobbes, is to confer all their power, all people's power, all the constituents' power, and strength upon one man or upon one assembly of men that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will. And he says, this is a real unity of them all. Please pay close attention to this, because when he says this is a real unity of them all, he's saying something really specific here, and something that's going to be really important later on when he talks about how powerful this government is. He's essentially saying that by you giving your power to the common power, again, hypothetically in the state of nature, you weren't actually there when you wrote the constitution of this government or the Declaration of Independence, you weren't there. But if you were in the state of nature, When you give your power to the common power, you are therefore making that common power the author, or you are becoming the author of that common power's actions. Now, I'll say that again. This gets a little tricky, but that means that whatever the common power does, their actions, the actions of the common power are actually your actions. You are the author of the common power's actions. Whatever they do, it is because of you. Again, hypothetically speaking, if you were to go through the state of nature sort of social contract hypothetical. So now that you are the author of the common power's actions, how powerful is this common power going to be? And I'll tell you right now, it's going to be very, very powerful. In chapter 18, he details some of the limitations, or in this case, the lack of limitations to this common power. To begin, the subjects cannot change the form of government at all. You cannot change the government. You cannot amend it. They are bound by covenant. You are bound by covenant. And you promised to disobey this covenant, and to disobey the common power is to be unfair to all those other people who'd also signed the covenant and are still obeying the common power. So you cannot. The sovereign power cannot abdicate or relinquish their power, because that would be to break the covenant on the other side. Now, in the United States, I know we have terms, of course, but what this would sort of look like in the United States or any republic or democracy where you have terms, what this would look like is that the office of the president cannot ever abolish the office of the president. So Donald Trump, our president, cannot say, oh, there's no more presidents from here on forward. No, that would be to destroy the covenant that the United States supposedly has. He says no man can, without injustice, protest against the sovereign. You cannot protest against your government. Why? Because again, you are the author of the sovereign's actions. You are the author of your government's actions. Whatever your government does, you have given them the power to do that. You would, in a sense, by protesting, be blaming the government, be blaming other people for your own actions. Of course, there is a caveat here. He says, without injustice, and you might be asking, well, what does injustice actually mean? And he doesn't actually tell us what injustice would entail, at least not in this chapter, which is kind of unfortunate. So he is very vague here. Fourth point, the sovereign cannot be punished. Again, just as before, you will be punishing others for your own actions because you are the author of the sovereign's actions. The sovereign settles all disputes, and the sovereign has power to make war and peace as they think best. Again, they are able to do this because they are protecting us from the state of nature, which is horrible. And you, as a reasonable person, according to Thomas Hobbes, don't want to be in the state of nature. So your only option is to do this, according to Thomas Hobbes. What are the takeaways from this, right? What is takeaways from this week? Well, if I had to summarize it, it will be like this. Hobbes believes the state of nature is horrible. The only way to avoid it is to create common power. This common power is indeed super, super, super powerful. Very powerful. Two questions you might want to ask at this point to sort of challenge Hobbes, or sort of reflect on whether you would agree with Hobbes, are these. One, Hobbes himself admits that covenants are useless without a common power that has the sword. The common power needs to have the sword, right? You can see this in his cover with the Leviathan. The sword is the power to punish people. So why do we even need covenants or a social contract? Is this not just all about power and might making right? If the sword is what gives the common power its power, what is the covenant and the social contract even doing? Do we even need it? As we're going to see later on with Machiavelli, he's going to say that it's actually all about power and there is no contract or agreement. Secondly, would we all actually agree to the common power if we were in the state of nature? So imagine that you were in the state of nature, which according to Hobbes, again, no one lives in the state of nature unless you are, again, he's very Eurocentric, very discriminatory, very racist, unless you are a Native American living before colonization. But if you were living in a state of nature, would you actually create this common power and give it all the power that Hobbes gives it or not? I'm interested to hear what you have to say in the discussion post. Go ahead and post your thoughts there and go ahead and respond to a classmate as well. That's all for this week. Until next time.